All right, so tonight I decided I'm going to talk to everyone about the placenta, this magic organ right here, right? The magic placenta. What do you do with your placenta? Now, I will share some transparency about my ignorance. I gave birth to four children before I realized that the baby was not technically inside the placenta. And believe it or not, a lot of people, not a lot, but I've had people with similar questions over the years. My last child was born in 2005. I became a doula in 2006. And it was actually in that training when I learned that the placenta was a whole separate organ. I mean, technically, the baby's in it, right? Because we're looking at this sac, and the sac does extend out. It's the membrane extension of the placenta. So, technically it's in there, but it's not. It's not fully in the placenta. But something that we all should be very aware of. Many people nowadays are questioning what to do with their placenta. It comes up quite often. I always ask my clients, now that different ideas are floating and surfacing on social media, people want to know what to do, what's a good idea, or what should I do with my placenta. I always like to say that the placenta is the it's a life force. It's like this is the lifeline for your baby, and the placenta is the dynamic organ that helps to keep your baby thriving in utero. Sometimes miscarriages happen as a result of a dysfunctioning or a defected placenta. The placenta is so important through the pregnancy. So I always like to encourage people to honor it, right? The last thing you want to do is throw it away. Okay. You can at least bury it, give it a respectful burial or somewhere in your backyard. It makes great compost if you wanted to plant a tree with it or a bush. I know before I knew better, I did keep the last three placentas, but the first baby, I didn't know any better. But with all three of my children, I buried it with a tree. And so, that tree will be nourished, continue to be nourished by that placenta. And that's a beautiful thing, especially if you bury it somewhere on some land that, is family centered, where, your grandparents or your grandparents, that land has been passed down for generations. Why not? That's an excellent idea. It'll keep in the freezer for years until you decide what you want to do with it. But ultimately, you really want to honor it. Honor that placenta. Don't throw it away. Don't just give it away. I don't encourage that either, unless that's something that you want to do. Now, I'm all for informed decision making, right? So, hospitals, a lot of times, they'll take those placentas. They tell you they throw them away as biohazardous material, but some hospitals we know do not. Sometimes hospitals will sell those placentas to a variety of different um, vendors, cosmetic vendors, scientists and research, other medical facilities, stem cell research, just all kind of ways placentas can be broken down. So, you know, be mindful of what you want to do with yours. So, a couple of ways that people decide to honor their placenta if they are going to keep it is one, and she's on here tonight. I see you, Jody. She's a placenta encapsulator. So yayo to yayo, y'all need to look her up, right? So there are several people out here nowadays that are doing placenta encapsulation. That is where you take this placenta after the birth of the baby, of course, and you dehydrate it. I'm sorry. So you prepare it first. My job, when I get the placenta in my hand, is to inspect it. That's the first thing I do. I'm going to inspect it and make sure that all the pieces are intact. We want to make certain that no pieces of the placenta are left behind in the mother. And so it can be a little challenging. You just have to be familiar with a placenta. It comes together like a puzzle. And so when you pick it up, it's kind of floppy and loose, it's like meat, right? And so when you pick it up, you want to kind of hold it steady. Sometimes I'll even fold it in slightly on itself as such in order to help determine whether or not all the pieces are there. And so where you see these dark lines engraved here, that's a representation of some of the indentations you'll see in an actual placenta. And so we take it, and if you kind of fold it in on itself just ever so slightly, you will notice that all the pieces will come back together like a puzzle. And that's something that we like to ensure. That's one way that we can ensure that all of the pieces came out of the mother. There's no gaps missing in that puzzle. There's no pieces missing. And that's critical, because if pieces of the placenta are left behind in the mother, it can cause hemorrhaging. It can also cause the delay of her breast milk coming in. Breast milk is triggered, the second stage of lactation is triggered by the release of the placenta in its entirety. And so, if pieces remain behind, then certain hormones aren't triggered to initiate the lactogenesis 2, or the second phase of lactation. And again, the mother can also hemorrhage, because the little pieces of placenta that are left behind can prevent the uterus from involuting, or clamping down, as we like to call it, contracting, being firm, nice and firm. So those little pieces of placenta can prevent the uterus from doing that. Blood clots can form inside the uterus, and then we have some hemorrhaging situations. Sometimes, if that is the case, mothers have to go in and have what's called like a D&C, or a scraping of the uterine lining, to help remove any pieces of uterus, of placenta, that might still be attached to the uterus. And so it's very important, especially you unassisted birthers out there, or you doulas that are standing in the gap, trying to, well, not trying, or being your best as a midwife without full clinical training, to understand the importance of all of that placenta being released from the mother's body in order to, prevent hemorrhaging, like I said, and, a plethora of other infections and all kind of other things can stem from those pieces remain behind attached to her. So, like I said, I have to inspect it. I'm inspecting for that. I'm also looking at the sac. I just look at the sac primarily to make sure all of it is there. Sometimes the sac is kind of ripped and torn from birth itself, right? From the baby busting through. But it's also kind of cool to notate where the sac actually burst. So I do not bust water sacs. Like, I do not bust the bag of membranes. I do not do it. It is very common that for obstetricians to do such a thing. Some midwives in hospitals also will break waters, as we call it, or bust your sac. It helps to push labor along in some cases. One of the reasons why, in my training as a traditional midwife, again, learning through grand elder midwives here, we don't like to break the sac, because there are several cultures around the world that have belief systems about babies born in their sacs. And we call it being born in the caul. I think it's CAULD, something like, or CALD, something like that. But born in the caul, right? And the belief systems, depending on the culture you go to, is usually going to be centered in some kind of spirituality. Those babies are perceived to be psychic in some way. They're believed to be seers, clairvoyant, are more intuitive, uh, messengers. There's all kind of beliefs around it. And so if we burst it, we won't know, right? We won't know if this is that baby coming through with a message for the human species, right? So that's one of the reasons I don't break it. And I was fortunate. I've gone most of my life, y'all, most of my life as a birth worker without truly seeing a baby born in the sac. And I've been doing this work, like I said, since 2006. And this year, at the top of this year, I had 3 back to back. Yes, I did. Had 3 babies back to back born in their sac in February. It was magical. Such a special moment for me. Those are special little babies. All my babies are special, right? But those, I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you for choosing me. And they came through. Now, of course, when they come out, the sac will rupture itself as the baby is being born. But those babies, sometimes, like one of my babies, the sac was all the way down her chest, and I had to physically remove the membrane so she could breathe. And so that's a whole, unique experience in and of itself. So again, we're inspecting it to make sure all the pieces are intact. We're also looking at the sac, right, and make sure that it is there. Again, like I said, I like to see sometimes where the little hole was that the baby actually fit through. Sometimes it's off to the side. It's really just cool to look at. And the other thing I'm inspecting is the cord, right? The cord is, again, that lifeline. And we're going to talk about this in great detail. So the cord should have 3 vessels in there, right? 2 veins and an artery. This is not going to really be a good example, but this is a model, of course. But as you can see here, you have the blue and the red kind of circling around each other to simulate the arteries and the veins. And so all of the cords should have 2 veins and an artery. And that's one of the things that we're checking for. I've only ever seen that 3. I've never seen one born with 2. We are supposed to notate that and refer those babies out to a pediatrician, or even send them over to a children's healthcare medical hospital or something, and depends on what that looks like. But I would say theoretically, I would imagine, because we know that veins provide fresh blood, arteries take it away, right? So we would imagine that if a cord only had 2, there would have had to have been an artery and maybe just 1 vein, right? I can't imagine it, it just being 2 veins or just, right, 2 arteries. That doesn't make sense. So if that baby was to make it full term, I think it's safe to assume that there's at least 1 vein and 1 artery. Nonetheless, we look at it. After we cut it, that's one of the things we like to do, is inspect it to be certain that there are 3 vessels. Now, that leads me into delayed cord cutting, right? A hot topic of discussion. Let me take a little sip of my juice. Because delayed cord cutting can be a hot topic. Now, we understand that if you've had a baby in the hospital and you birthed your baby without the knowledge of delayed cord cutting, then chances are very high that the cord for your baby was cut prematurely. And what does that mean? It was cut before the blood stopped transfusing from the placenta into the baby, right? That needs to happen. We like for this to happen. That is an awesome physiological process that takes place to help ensure that this baby has all of its blood from this organ here, and all of the vital nutrients that the baby will need to continue to sustain itself until your breast milk comes in, your mature milk comes in, right? And so many physicians will cut the cord prematurely. And the reason they do this is they once believed, and many of them still do, they believe that delayed cord cutting actually causes jaundice, right? And it does not. I mean, the idea is, I get it, where they get the idea and the concept from, because so what causes jaundice, when we're looking at jaundice, right, we're talking about the yellowish hue that we find in baby skin, or any person that's dealing with some kind of liver issues. You see that yellowish hue in their skin, yellowing in the eyes. That's because jaundice, the color of it, is caused by bilirubin. And bilirubin is a byproduct of your red blood cells as they're forming themselves. The byproduct is called bilirubin. And your liver is responsible for metabolizing that extra bilirubin. And so there is great blood volume left behind in the placenta after the baby is born. Some studies say that there is as much as 40% of that baby's blood volume still remaining inside of this placenta, right? And so physicians once believed that if they cut off that extra blood volume, then they can mitigate or reduce the chances of that baby having physiological jaundice, right? We have physiological jaundice, and then there's pathological jaundice. Physiological jaundice shows up in most babies. About 80%, some studies say, that of newborn babies will experience some form of physiological jaundice. That's the jaundice that tends to show up about the 2nd or 3rd day postpartum. And then it'll clear itself out, usually about 5 days to a week after birth. It's one of the things that we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but I always make my parents aware of that so that we can just keep an eye on it. But physiological jaundice is very common in newborn babies. And it is because of, one of the reasons is because of exactly what I'm saying. The byproduct of that bilirubin and some of the excess red blood cells, as your body, the baby's body, is metabolizing and breaking those cells down. The byproduct of that bilirubin builds up in their bloodstream. One of the best ways to alleviate that is hydrating the baby and encouraging the baby to have bowel movements, which colostrum, the first milk that a mother's bodies make, actually has a laxative component in it that encourages those first bowel movements. Nature already thought about this, y'all. You know, it's a no-brainer. All you gotta do is put the baby on the boob, put the baby on the breast. The body will produce that colostrum and push that stool, those first stools, out of the baby's body, which can help to lower any signs of jaundice, help the baby prevent it. And also sunshine, ultraviolet lights, right? Ultraviolet light is very important. I tell my families all the time, treat your baby like a house plant, right? So I usually don't tell them all that the first night. When I come back the next day to check on my families, this is the conversation I'll have. I encourage them to treat their baby like a house plant. Y'all don't know if y'all can see my little plant next to me, right? If you have a house plant, you know you need to open your curtains or your blinds every day to allow those ultraviolet rays and all that good vitamin D and sunshine to flow into your home. Your plants absorb it, metabolize it, and grow and be great, right? Well, similarly, your baby does something as well. The baby needs that ultraviolet light to help them metabolize the bilirubin that's building up in their bodies, and it helps to flush it out their systems, specifically on a skin level. And then the liver, will do the rest. And I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the liver. The liver is such a phenomenal organ in so many ways. So bringing it back into delayed cord cutting, I just want to wrap that up. You can literally feel the cord pulsating after the baby is born, right? The cord you can feel a heartbeat running through it. And if time permits and depends on what's going on, I'll allow dad or mom or the partner, whoever, to feel that cord and feel the pulsing, the heart pulsing, the heartbeat through the cord. It's a phenomenal opportunity. You will only get to do it once, right? For this baby, because once it stops, it's done. This placenta begins to immediately die. Okay. And you can literally see that transition happening. The cord blood, you'll see the cord will start out feeling very vibrant and almost bluish, purplish, just vibrant in color, right? They did a good job with trying to mimic that with this model. And then as minutes go by, you'll see it starting to go pale white and limp and cold. And it'll just kind of fall and sag from the placenta side all the way over to the baby side. And that can take anywhere from 5 minutes to as much as an hour, y'all. It takes time for that process to happen. We don't rush it. I would say on average about 20 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes is done. It's completely emptied itself into your baby, and we're no longer in need of the placenta per se, right? After that time period. But I've seen some phenomenal things. I have actually seen babies that have had slow transitions. You know, they come out, they're thriving, but they're kind of slow at getting their respiratory going. You know, we may have to give them a little oxygen or something, and just to keep them thriving and coherent. But in those situations, I have actually seen the mother birth her placenta and it's still pulsating, y'all. That placenta is still working and it'll keep working. And that is phenomenal, because what we have learned about the placenta is that it feeds off of the mother's heartbeat. And it is a mother's heartbeat that causes the pulsating and the pumping of the blood through the placenta. So how is it working, y'all? So what that tells me, that there's a symbiotic thing happening in there, right? The baby is also functioning on the baby's heartbeat. It has to be, because how else is it? How is that happening? It's no longer in the mother's body. It's out. It's laying in a bowl, and it's still hot and warm and pulsating up until 30 minutes to an hour, until this baby fully is transitioned, well, thriving, screaming and hollering at us. And that's when it dies off. So this is what I'm saying. I got chills over that one. The placenta is a dynamic organ, and you really want to honor it. Don't throw it away. At least bury it in that way. Um, Another thing we talked about placenta encapsulation, right? Placenta encapsulation. I'm not well versed. I stuttered on that one. I'm not well versed on placenta encapsulation. I have been trained by the elder midwives how to prepare a placenta and perform placenta encapsulation. Most of the families that I have encountered that have encapsulated and consumed their placenta in that way speak very highly of the results. They talk about having more energy, how it helped them defeat postpartum depression, specifically if they had it in a previous birth and they didn't consume their placenta and this time they did. Now they know the difference and they're able to, share that story for themselves that yes, the placenta helped me defeat that. Even mothers have had stories where they may have had a delay of or low milk supply with a previous pregnancy, and they took their placenta capsules in this pregnancy, and they had an abundance of milk supply. These are all what we call anecdotal testimonials or results. I do not know if there is any hardcore scientific research out there on consuming your placenta, but I've only ever heard positive feedback. So I certainly encourage you to look into it. It's a alternative to burying it with the plant. Another thing that families tend to do with their placenta is do lotus birth, right? Lotus birth. So, lotus birth is where you do not cut your placenta at all. Your cord, I'm sorry, you don't cut the cord at all. You leave the cord attached to your baby until it falls off on its own. Now, lotus birth, I think, is magical in its own way. I have all the respect for lotus birth. When you do something of that nature, you want to definitely do your research on what type of herbs that you need to curate your placenta in, because it is an organ, it is meat, right? Essentially. So it will smell as it decays. And some of the ingredients that they suggest to use is the number one is sea salt. So you want to definitely have an abundance of sea salt. You want to be able to care for this placenta daily in some capacity. I think they flip it, maybe. I'm not quite sure. It's always been healthy when I go back to check on my babies and mamas for the families that choose to do lotus birth. It's not something that I am, again, astute in. It's one of those things that I just honor. And if they tell me they want to do lotus birth, I know I'm not going to cut the cord and just leave it intact. And we talk about how to maneuver your baby. So what happens when you do lotus birth, my only concern as a midwife is this cord, after about 24 hours, becomes very hard. The word is called stenotic. It's very hard and rigid. It doesn't give. It'll break, but it doesn't give. And so as days go by, the harder it gets. It kind of shrinks in on itself, becomes very, very thin. It goes from being as thick as this here to probably almost as thin as this cord, maybe a little bit thicker. Maybe if I put the cord in two, about like that over the course of some days, right? And so the issue for a midwife is it's still attached to the baby's navel, and you have to be incredibly careful how you move this baby, and so we don't rip this cord from the baby's navel. We don't want to do that, right? So I always tell my families that choose to do lotus birth is to consider this a Siamese twin for the next week. Everywhere that you move the baby, you have to move the placenta. They go together. They're joined by the cord, basically. And if you have toddlers, you have to be extra, extra careful with your toddlers, because toddlers, they're so rambunctious. They're just so fun. Toddlers are so fun, right? And they'll just jump on the bed, or they'll just jump, on you. They're just in their own little worlds. And so you really want to be careful with your toddlers if you're doing a lotus birth around the baby, because I'll give you a story. This family didn't do a lotus birth, but when I came back, I think to do the second visit or the third, I can't remember. They had caught the toddler, the 2-year-old, on their baby cam. He had climbed into the bassinet and was just sitting on it. And the parents said they had only left the room no more than 5 minutes. They went into the other room to eat. And the next thing they know, they look at the baby cam and they want, after a few minutes, you like, where's the baby? Where's the 2-year-old? You want to know because it's too quiet. Where did they go? Lo and behold, they look at the baby cam and he's just sitting in the bassinet staring at his little sister. He didn't touch her, but he had climbed in and he was staring at her. So this is what I'm saying. They're so curious. They're so fun. And you really want to be careful if you choose to do lotus birth and you have small children. Be very, very mindful of that because, again, the worst case scenario is that this cord snatches out of the baby's navel and then we have active bleeding. And it can even herniate it. It can pull and herniate that navel. So we don't want that, right? So that's the only concern that I have about lotus birth. I will say from a scientific level, there is nothing else physically transferring into the baby once the cord stops pulsating. The placenta has then served its purpose. It is done. It is complete. After that point, it's spiritual. So if you have a spiritual belief system of leaving the cord intact, totally do your thing. It's great. But some people ask me, well, what are the benefits? You cross over into a spiritual benefit. There's no longer a scientific or physiological benefit to leaving your cord attached for lotus birth. So it's all a great thing. Yep. Information, informed decision making. So that's a couple of ways we mentioned encapsulation and lotus birth, right? Another thing that people do is they burn the cord. And so I will say this. As we come into this new age, this new era, and we're reaching back, that's Sankofa, right? We're reaching back and we're bringing forward our customs and traditions. That's where some of these ideas and concepts are coming from. And we get to personalize them. We get to pick and choose which ones best fit our modern day lifestyle. That being said, people used to burn cords and still do in some countries when they don't have sterile scissors available, right? Babies can get infections when if you cut a freshly pulsating cord with scissors that aren't sterile. And that because there is a blood exchange happening there. Remember, we talked about the veins and the arteries, right? There's a back and forth happening here through the cord. And so if we cut that cord with scissors that have a bacteria on it, that bacteria can run into the baby and cause some kind of infection. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important that you use something sterile if you're going to cut the cord prematurely. One of the best ways to prevent that is delayed cord cutting. Delayed cord cutting will prevent that. If you just wait for the cord to stop pulsating and there's nothing else transferring back and forth through the cord, then you have minimized the risk greatly of any type of infection transfusing into this baby. Dirty scissors or not, please don't use them, but that's my point. You really want to use some sterile, clean scissors or burn the cord. And that's traditionally where that custom comes from. These cultures that do not have access to the sterile technique are keeping their tools in a sterile container, right? Grand midwives would boil their instruments on site. They would boil them before they left the house. So from what I was taught is that grand midwives, as soon as they came home from a birth, they would clean and sterilize all of their equipment by boiling it. But there was no way to keep it sterile because there was not plastic bags and things of that nature like we have today. So what they would do then is do their best to keep them clean in their whatever container or wraps or gauze or fabrics that they use. And then when they go to the birth, they would boil them again. They were so awesome, y'all. They would boil them again. So this is where the hot water comes in at. You ever wonder like why we always need hot water? That was it. Midwives, grand midwives use hot water for a variety of different things, and one of them was to sterilize their equipment. They're so smart. So much smarter than, yeah, I'm not even gonna go there. But yeah, so that's why we burn the cord, right? You want to and so if you choose to do that, there are instructions online. I would encourage you to definitely look online and find some instructions so that you can do it appropriately. It is a two-person's job. They have cord burning kits that you can buy where you actually kind of place the cord into like a little wooden box container, and then you hold a candlestick and both partners hold it, and they kind of burn the cord, and it takes about maybe upwards of 10 minutes in some case. Depends on how thick the cord is too, y'all, because sometimes those cords are very thick. This is an average. I've seen cords thicker than this, so I can only imagine how long that would take to burn a cord that was thicker than this. Artery, 3 vessels that's in the cord. All right. So since we're talking about placentas, y'all can't have this book, right? But I do encourage you, if you are a expecting family out there, or if you are a birth worker, this is an excellent read, y'all. It's called Placenta. It's by Robin Lim, and she's a midwife in. Ooh, forgive me if I'm wrong. I want to say the Philippines. Ooh, forgive me, Robin, if I'm wrong. But she's awesome. I'll bring the book a little bit closer so you can kind of get a feel for it. But it's simply called Placenta and the Forgotten Chakra. And she really goes into a lot of details about different ways to honor your placenta, how it's been honored throughout different generations and culturally. And then she breaks down a lot of science. So some of the information I'm sharing with you all tonight are like the history of why providers originally started to cut the cords because they thought it would lead to jaundice, right? It's in her book. She talks about that. Matter of fact, I thought about reading it to y'all, but I'm not gonna do that. Y'all didn't come on here to hear me read, but but it's in there. She talks about again why they believe that cutting the cord prematurely could help prevent jaundice, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Mm. I mean, if it does, and let me say this, because I'm not an obstetrician, maybe they have some sound reasoning as to why they believe cutting a cord prematurely prevents jaundice. However, the risks far outweigh that gain, right? So some of the risk of prematurely cutting the cord, as I mentioned, we already talked about the risk of increasing infection because you have the blood transfusing back and forth through this cord. Then there's also the risk of having what's called childhood anemia, right? When you prevent the baby from receiving, as I mentioned earlier, some of the blood volume, as much as 40% of the baby's blood volume has been noted to be retained in this placenta. You're preventing the baby from having some of that extra blood volume that they need to thrive. And so that's what can cause some of that childhood anemia. Um, Keeping the liver at optimal is the best way. And so that one herb, y'all, that I talk about all the time, dandelion, it shows up again, even in this, right? So one of the pregnancy issues that we see sometimes is this condition called PUPS. And I am not going to embarrass myself and try to pronounce the words. That's an acronym, PUPP. It's, oh, yeah, I'm not going to even try it. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. But PUBS is a condition that can cause the mom to break out in a rash. It's very, very itchy and irritating rash in her pregnancy. And here comes my theory on it, right? Because they say when they do testing for it, right, they test liver enzymes to understand why the mother has PUBs, right? And they're looking to see if certain liver enzymes are elevated. And they don't necessarily give her medication to treat it. They usually just give her atopical steroid creams, or they'll tell her something like have oatmeal or baking soda baths, or they also will tell you to get calamine lotion, right, to help control the itching, but they don't necessarily have a cure for it. Well, the reason why dandelion is so effective, because as we talked about, it's one of the herbs that will target that liver and flush it out. One of the reasons why I feel that pubs is an issue in pregnancy, alongside a lot of different pregnancy illnesses, is that liver, y'all. That liver is a phenomenal organ. It is responsible for cleansing the blood. You know that the liver cleanses about a liter of blood every minute, a little over a liter of blood every minute. Can you imagine how long, however old you are, if you have never detoxed, you need to consider it, because a lot of the issues and conditions that we deal with is due to a burnt out liver. Your liver is just toxic, it's just full of gunk. Imagine a filter. We're told to change our air filters in the house every season, right? I just changed. Well, I didn't. I had my son go up in the attic and change it, but but we change our air filters here in the house, especially when we cross over from using the central heat to the central air. And when he pulled that filter out, the new one was white. The old one was like a dusty dark gray, filled with just all kind of, lint and just ugh, right? And so that's why you change them, because you don't want that to get caught up in your air, recirculate itself back into the air. Same thing. Think about your liver. You don't want these toxins and things to keep circulating through your blood. You want your liver to be able to filter them out as efficiently as possible. And if you like alcohol, or if you've taken pharmaceutical medications, you really have to be intentional about detoxing your liver. Now, if you're pregnant, it can be a little bit more challenging, because again, you're pregnant. And let me digress back to pubs. If they test your liver enzymes and they say that they're elevated, my theory is because the mother is also responsible for breaking down the red blood cells that's coming through from baby, right? The placenta at that point in time, because the byproduct is of the bilirubin is processed out of the body by bile, and the baby is not supposed to poop in utero. So the baby's body knows not to allow the bile to build up in the baby's system. So that byproduct then filters back through the placenta into the mom's body through her liver, and then she flushes it out through her, or she excretes it out through her bowels, right? Her bile, bile, does what it does. It works its magic, and then it carries it out of the body through the colon. All right. So that's why it's so important that your baby, that you're not your baby, I'm sorry, that you have a healthy functioning liver. And so some of the herbs that you can look at beyond dandelion in your pregnancy that is safe for cleansing your liver, is turmeric, ginger. And you think about it, when women are dealing with pregnancy nausea, what's the first thing we tell them? Well, besides saltine crackers, we encourage them to do some ginger. Do some ginger tea. Well, ginger is a mild liver cleanser. We also encourage them to do peppermint. Now, peppermint doesn't necessarily target the liver, but some other things do. Turmeric. Turmeric is being encouraged by some doulas and other providers out here to also help alleviate pregnancy nausea. Well, that's because turmeric does target the liver. Okay. You also have milk thistle. Milk thistle is really good as well, and it's also safe for pregnancy. That's an herb, as well as cardamom and chicory root. Okay, so that's some things that you can look at if you're dealing with just even being preventative. Incorporate it into your diet. There are some cultures that dandelion root tea that some Asian cultures routinely will drink dandelion root tea for breakfast, right? As opposed to doing coffee like we do here in the States. That is their coffee. And so it's like a great jump start to your day. You're starting your day by flushing out your liver. Most of us will do our elimination when we wake up. It's very common, depending on your circadian rhythm and what you've adapted your body to. But in many cases, if your circadian rhythm is in alignment with the planet, your elimination really should be when you wake up. You assimilate throughout the night. You digest during the day, assimilate through the night, eliminate when you wake up. Boom. And so when you're doing that, it's a great idea to go ahead and initiate that elimination with some kind of cleansing herbal tea, right? And so dandelion is an excellent one, especially if you're dealing with, like I mentioned, pubs in your pregnancy, or any kind of pregnancy related symptoms like the nausea, as we spoke about, or we talked about a lot of different. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole nother hour. Yeah, as always, I hope I said something tonight of value. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Time is one of your most valuable resources, and I totally do not take it for granted. I am honored that you chose to share these last few minutes with me tonight. Remember to drink your water, get your vitamin D, and I'll see y'all back here next week. Peace and blessings.